Your brand is actually your reputation. If part of that is your logo, for example, it's what does seeing that logo bring to mind?
Leveraging your brand means that you pay attention to who your ideal client is, how do you want them to feel, and what do you say to guide them.
Humans are buying from humans. You're selling to humans. So how do we structure the crafting and the messaging and the bonding in ways that lead to that sale?
Today on Half a Bubble Out podcast, Catherine and I are going to talk about a huge part of your business success, brand messaging. We'll discuss why your brand is more than just your logo. We'll talk about how inconsistent brand messaging can weaken your impact, destroying customer trust and loyalty. We'll also share how to define your ideal customer and understand their pain points. And lastly, we'll explain why a message that speaks to values and emotions is more powerful than any message based on logic. So how do you deliver consistent brand messaging that builds lasting customers and loyalty? Let's dive in and find out. When we're talking about consistency of messaging, what are the things you think of and what are the challenges you've seen over the last 22 years of working with clients?
The first thing is that if a client is wise enough to actually create a message that is supposed to be used, right? A very consistent message. One of the challenges is I think they get bored with that message long before. Yeah. And so we have a tendency as human beings, especially as leaders, especially if we're innovative and creative, we struggle with being consistent because we get bored with the message. So you do all this work, hopefully, to create a message that you want to have put out there, but you forget how long it takes to actually make that stick. And you change course midstream and change the message, and your brand loses the leverage that consistent messaging would have. So getting bored is probably one of the biggest ones I've seen through 20 plus years of marketing.
Today, we're going to talk about like 5 points of what can you do? What are the things that you need to make sure you're catching and paying attention to leverage your brand, strengthen your brand so that you can avoid that. And then some tips on how to actually avoid some of the pitfalls, such as getting bored with the message. And there are a few others. The first thing we're going to talk about is let's talk about what a brand is for a moment.
Okay. So the concept of brand, I suppose, goes back all the way to, branding your cattle, right? Where you take a searing hot thing and you apply it to the and everybody screams. And I never had the privilege of doing any of that. But it is part of why companies often will, and people will often think of a brand just as a logo, right? Because originally it was that stamping of this is my cattle, my ranch, my logo. We take it further than that. So we talk about your brand is actually your reputation. So if it is, if part of that is your logo, for example, it's what does seeing that logo bring to mind for me as a customer? When
What
I
are the
see
thoughts?
that,
What are the
thoughts,
feelings?
emotions? Am I connected to the brand? Do I look at the brand and get irritated? Or do I look at the brand and go, I like that brand? So we talk about brand as reputation. And then we go a step further and talk about branding as bonding.
And talk about bonding. Like, let's tease that out a little bit for people who haven't heard about that. Bonding means what? What are we talking about when that?
It really is the emotional connection that your customer has to your brand, right? Do they, again, is there sense I like that brand. Like they get me. I'm part of that tribe. I understand who they are and how they think, and I'm aligned with that. So much of our buying behavior as human beings is pretty tribal. Like,
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I mean, you're either a Diet Pepsi or a Diet Coke person if you are still drinking sodas or have not jumped off that train. You choose one or the other. You have an alignment to a certain brand and you're tied to that brand. And that is true across large brands, but it's also true in the daily things that we do, in the local things that we do in our economy. I am tied to a local coffee brand, right? So I go to that shop and I buy their beans. But that kind of connection that you have to that brand and the products that or services that brand offers is what bonding is.
Bonding is a natural human circumstance unless something goes wrong. But bonding and trusting, other than just those rare, unique circumstances, is really normal for us as human beings.
Hmm.
And it's a way for us to actually say we like and trust. Trust gets high. And when you bond, trust is high usually. And so therefore you're like, okay, that's what you want. You want
Hmm.
people to go automatically. When I think of your name, I think of who you are, I think of what's going on. I have good thoughts and I have good emotions and I like that. And I
Yeah.
feel attached or I belong there or something like that.
Well, and it's really critical because, if you're in any kind of an industry that's commoditized,
Yep.
where there's multiple players in that industry, and maybe you have a really clear value proposition that sets you apart. We do this differently, we do whatever. But ultimately, if a customer isn't bonded to you, then when changes happen, when you have to increase prices or decrease a size and you're paying a little bit more for less because of the economy and the way that things are working and how everyone's just trying to keep up, it's that bonding that will allow you to stay connected. It's that bonding that allow you to keep that customer even through those kinds of transitions. And if you have created a brand that creates bonding with your customers, it also helps you weather the storms when you have an employee that makes a mistake or you make a mistake as the owner of the company or whatever. It allows you to weather some of the storms because where there's trust, there tends to be a little bit more grace extended and a willingness to go, okay, well, that was probably just a one time thing and we'll keep moving forward.
Yeah. If you're going to spot a pattern and then a variation in the pattern, that's really what happens a lot of times. I like the old analogy of when we do things for other people, when we give them positive experiences or exposures, we're gaining change in the emotional bank account, right?
Yes.
Change in the pocket.
Hmm.
And every time we do something that's positive, as somebody experiences positive, it's as if we're putting the change in our own pocket. And when something is negative or downsized, there's a tax involved. That's what
Hmm.
happens in trust. And so you have to pull some of that change out. If you don't have enough touch points with customers and you don't have enough opportunities to leverage a good experience. So you have to have multiple experiences that are semi-frequent. And then you have to have opportunities where you get to the place where you go, okay, each one of those, how do I leverage them to be the best positive experience possible? From a short giggle or a laugh on an Instagram reel or something like that, to helpful information, to a positive experience with customer service. When we work through those things, each one of those gives us change. When a customer has a bad experience with one of our employees, the change from the company goes back out of our pocket, goes over there. If we don't have enough experiences that are positive enough, then we don't have any change to pull from. And when there's no change to pull from, the customer, in a sense, goes, okay, I'm gone.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy because change in the pocket's tangible. It's kind of like you're buying their attention. You're not buying it in relationship, but in relationships, if you don't treat people well, they go, look, you're a jerk, and they wander off.
Indeed, they do.
It happens in marriages. It happens
No.
with friends. It happens with family. It's like, I'm tired of this. I'm out of here because you're in debit mode now. You're taking credit on our relationship. And
Yeah.
I'm finally tired of it.
Yeah.
And they walk out. Okay. We talked already about branding and what that is and what our goal is. Our goal is to bond, is to build that a reputation
Hmm.
and bond. If that's the first thing we have to think about, then the second thing we want to think about is actually defining who the ideal client or clients are.
Yep.
Let's talk about that.
All right.
How do you see the design of an avatar or a persona in these days? What is that for people who don't know what it is? And then let's talk about what goes into one.
You're really talking about understanding who your ideal client is and then gathering as much information about how they think, how they operate, where they spend their time, what their tendencies are, what their pain points are, the things that you can solve for them, and really honing like who are your one or two, sometimes three, depending on what you're offering and who you are as a company. Like if we could have 15 of these tomorrow, I would take them in a heartbeat. Well, who is that client, that person? If you're B2B, who is that organization that you want to be able to sell to? So so that's really the core of developing a avatar or a persona. so that you can then write messaging that is specific to that person. And what that does is it allows us to move from this sort of morass of marketing to everyone
Hmm.
to actually marketing to a human. And it changes how we think and how we write and how we craft the messaging, because we're actually thinking about an individual when we're writing it. And that makes a huge difference in how you put copy together.
Absolutely. And so when you have this avatar, when you're thinking through it, you're thinking through who's your ideal client. So some companies only have one ideal client. Ideally, you have two or three types of personas that fit into your ideal client.
Well, and really realizing that while it is difficult sometimes in business to turn business away, if you choose to take on a client that ultimately you know in the core of who you are not going to be able to serve them. And we've all made this mistake.
Yep.
I mean, we have made it more than once. But if you take on a client that you ultimately cannot serve, you're just destined for a bummer of a ride and then a breakup. So if you know that in the core of who you are, having the courage to say no, that that actually isn't going to work. And sometimes on occasion, it isn't the revenue isn't big enough. It's actually the problem is it would be amazing revenue,
Right.
but we still probably can't serve them based on who we are and who they are.
Those are universal traits, the core values and everything else. What changes that ideal client? They have enough money, they have the right kind of project, they have the right kind of mindset and everything else. That's great. And those are important things to start with identifying.
Mhm,
But then you have these different, let's just call them personas or avatars. The word gets interchanged a lot when we're designing, we're describing a fictitious customer
mhm,
so that we can hone in our marketing much more effectively. One of the things that's different in the commercial space that I was thinking about is that while they have all those same values, one is a commercial property that's owned by a partner group,
mhm.
some kind of an investment partner group. Odds are they are investing all over the United States or, one half of the United States or something like that. They've got a region. Another persona that fits within that ideal customer is somebody who they manage their own properties.
Mhm.
So the partners are probably not managing their properties. They probably have another management company. And the reason they would come to you is because they're unhappy with their management company. The other group of folks are what we call self-managed.
Mhm.
And self-managed has its own set of unique issues and challenges and opportunities. Those are two nuances of this persona, but you can build out marketing copy and marketing stories to try and reach those people.
Yeah.
That's the what an avatar is, and that's the power of an ideal client with its unique segments or personas and avatars in the midst of it.
Well, and another easy illustration would be if you're a nonprofit. We know that at the very least, you have two very distinct markets that you're marketing to. You have two distinct avatars. You've got the folks that you're serving with
Mhm.
whatever it is you're doing, and then you've got the donors, right? The needs and the marketing and the messaging for those two are very, very different.
Yeah.
So understanding those two helps you then design marketing that goes both
Well,
directions.
and then with your donors, you almost have a slice that bleeds over and you have donors and volunteers.
Mhm.
If you need volunteers in your organization. Now you've got three groups, but the volunteers and the donors are typically out of a similar group. Sometimes they're a little different. And then the users of the services that you're the people you're trying to
Yeah.
help. And you're trying to convince them that you're there to help them.
Right. But you can imagine just with that scenario, if you're not thinking about it in those at least two ways in that particular illustration for a nonprofit, then your marketing could become pretty muddled because you're only thinking about particularly one audience potentially. So the more that you can create those avatars, create those personas that really target who are the ideal clients and how are they different so that you can send messaging to them that actually resonates with who they are and the needs that they have that you can meet.
That's perfect. So this is who we are. This is what branding is. This is our ideal customer. Now we want to talk about what is it actually we want them to know. And
Mhm.
that falls into three categories. What we want them to feel, what we want them to think, and what we want them to do. Before we think about that, as part of the avatar process, we're defining who they are, their demographics, their psychographics, how they think, the way they make decisions, and their value graphics. We've talked about value graphics in another podcast, but high level, let's just walk through these. Demographics are the details and data about a person. They're
Yes.
the things I can count. How many
And
people are in their household? How much money do they make? Where do they live?
how old are they?
Psychographics. What are the things they think? What are the interests they have? What are the books they read? But then there's a value graphic that really we've come to believe is even more important than the other two. We all started with what do we know about our customers? And in the old days, we just knew demographics.
Mhm.
And then starting in the 70s and 80s, this whole idea of how do we understand their psychology a little bit? But what evolved on top of that, that's even more powerful, is people make decisions based on their core values.
Absolutely.
And so, with those core values, if we can understand what their core values are and what they want, that's powerful because you immediately want to say, in when I'm thinking about the customer and how do I leverage this, you leverage it additionally with how do I make you feel? Why is feeling so important? As opposed to going to something, what do we want them to know first?
To put it as simply as I've ever known how to, we buy from people we like. We buy from people wh- who we sense
Yeah.
are like
Yeah.
us. I mean, end of story. We just do. And as much as human beings want to be like, no, I buy based on knowledge. You're like, okay, I'm glad, whatever you takes to sleep at night. But the reality is, you actually buy based on emotion and you use knowledge to support how you feel, actually. That's just how it works. So that's one of the biggest reasons to understand and to leverage values, because the more we are value aligned, the more the chances are that you're going to buy from me because you kind of go, you're my people and I want to be part of your people.
And the saying that ends with, and the mind will follow.
Capture the heart and the mind will follow.
We use that a lot around here. So think about this. Several years ago,
Mm.
you wrote a commercial that was really, really successful on the radio and TV. No, actually, it wasn't on TV. It was just on the radio. And it was about women putting on jeans.
Yes, I do remember this. And the funny part is it was for a secondhand store. And so how do you capture the values and the heart of a customer who's doing that? And I really went after the experience of trying on a pair of jeans that you probably couldn't afford normally. And you put them on and it's how you look and it's how you feel in them and it's all of the different ways that they fit who you are as a woman. And then ultimately at the end of the day, not only can you buy the jeans, but you can buy the mirror
Because it's a
because it's a
secondhand store.
secondhand store. So it was a really fun commercial and it really did do really, really well because it tapped into the reasons that people will shop at a secondhand stores because they can't afford the full price stuff or they just want a deal. Like
Yeah.
sometimes, especially, I mean, I have friends who it's like, all you're doing is just going, I got this deal. You wouldn't believe it. And some of it is just that, right? So the idea that you could get incredible deals and feel really good about yourself in the process was part of that whole value system and tribe. So
Some of the
it was
most
fun.
powerful commercials ever. And there's a difference between commercials for large chain companies, international companies,
Mhm.
national companies. They're doing things at a different level because their brands are known. And then there's the smaller companies advertising at a local level or on the internet. But one of the things that's significant in powerful brands that we're talking about is telling stories not about, hey, we have 5 available and this
Mhm.
is the prices and all that stuff. There is a place for that kind of information, but it's interspersed within great storytelling, telling things about first person and how would you feel. And I mean, when you're talking about those jeans, you were describing the process of being in a changing room and trying on the jeans, that everything was right.
Mhm.
The fit was right. They looked good in the mirror. You felt like everything looked proportioned properly. And before you ever walked out of the dressing room, you were happy.
Mhm.
You were like, and you were extra happy because of how often you go through and will grab multiple pairs of something, go into the dressing room and try on a bunch of stuff. And then it all looked good on the rack, but it didn't quite work in the dressing room. How many times has every woman experience that.
Right.
And you're describing the moment where you no longer have that problem. You found the ones and they did everything you want. And you're like, I have it. I've got it. It looks good. They don't look used and they're a great price. This was a total grand slam score. But you're walking through it from a first person experience.
Yep.
Telling the stories is a powerful way to get people to know how to feel and describing people having an amazing experience. One of our mentors wrote a Rolex commercial about a man who went to the top of Everest and he had his Rolex there with him. And it was a powerful one that just talked about the experience of being that person who conquered that goal, standing on the top of the world, looking out of it. And he slightly pulled in the Rolex as almost an afterthought. And that sold tons and tons of Rolexes
Yeah, if I
at
remember
an
it right,
independent Rolex
if I remember it
vendor.
right, it was the concept of whatever mountain you're conquering will have your Rolex waiting for you. It was so cool.
And all of a sudden, like, you just say that and you're like,
huh.
boom, that's where it
Yep.
lands. This kind of way of thinking about marketing is counterintuitive to the way most people think about it. But it's also, let's exchange the word marketing for leveraging your brand to get more customers that pay more money. You can use this to get more for premium products, for average products. But when you start telling stories about this kinds of stuff, that's why people like it. The guy that said, literally for Verizon, can you hear me yet? Can you still hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
For 5 years, that
was-
guy was under contract.
Yeah.
And it was super powerful. But it was never, that's all it was how do I engage in this thing what do I experiencing and what do I really want? And you're doing that thing that like, hey, that's me. We do that. It was gold for Verizon. And they're still in the top 2 regularly of cell phone providers in the United States by a long shot, them and AT&T. If we've got the emotions with these storytellings, it's fun. There's enough repetition. People start to know our name. Then we've got this whole entire issue of, okay, how are we going to clearly articulate what's going on? So we want to talk about what's the main problem we're solving and engage that. We want to talk about the overt benefit achieved. So what's the big win on overachieving that? 80% of people are actually motivated by problems. That's their primary motivation, right? For solving something. They want to solve a problem versus achieve a goal. Yes, we all want to achieve a goal, but there's a problem standing in our way. Talk about solving the problem, then talk about the benefit or the value of the goal and how valuable it really is to them. And then move to, okay, how can you plan this? We talk about overt benefit, reason to believe, and significant difference. What's the reason to believe? Now I'm still talking to your thoughts. What's the evidence that I can fulfill on this big promise?
Yep.
You like me. Now I'm going to make you a promise about a product or a service. Can you really deliver? Or are you like everybody else in marketing, as we think about? You're inflating everything beyond. Some people, honestly, I think when you go to talk to them about you didn't deliver on your promise, they're like, that's marketing. Nobody delivers on their promise. We all overinflate the promise. And then you purchase. How could you even expect us to deliver on our promise? And there are some people that are like that.
Sad, but it's true. What
you kill is your reputation with other people. You kill referrals and all kinds of stuff like that. It's not leveraging your brand. And then we get into significant difference. Why are we different than everybody else? Verizon was really clear. Verizon, we knew it was, they were a brand. This is why large brands have it easier. Everybody knew who the brand was. We knew that it was cell phone. We knew the information. But what we really wanted, they were trying to say the significant difference is you can have connectivity and you can have clear conversations in more places than anybody else.
Right.
Whether it was true or not. But they were inferring that. And really, really, really well. So you got that. What's the problem? The overt benefit, the reason to believe. And they would talk about in their commercials that they have this many cell towers and this many things and this many areas. Because they're justifying at least somewhere. Well, is that even possible? It's true. Oh yeah. Well, you can do this, this, and this. In your company, it might be, we have these certifications. We've been in business this long. We have this many customers.
And testimonials.
Our Google rankings are here or whatever. Our trust pilot's high. and then that significant difference of how we stand out. So we've talked about feeling, we've talked about thinking. When it comes to thinking, does anything else stand out to you?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
And then what we want them to do, leveraging your brand in the age old world of sales. If you don't ask for the sale,
Right.
more often than not, you will not get it.
Yeah. There's got to be a call to action. And there's a lot of times where marketing falls down in just not being clear enough in what's the next step I need to take. What's the next thing you want me to do? We fail in that sometimes in especially in our website world where it's like I don't know what activity you want me to do on here. There's way too much happening. Or we are inconsistent when we drive from an ad to someplace to be like, this is the activity. This is it. This is all I want you to do. So making sure that those calls to action are really, really clear is a very key part of leveraging your brand.
And then as we're working through that, as we're from a sales perspective asking for the sale or online a call to action or telling somebody what we want them to do, then we're actually engaging people. We all want to go, okay, well, what's next? What am I supposed to do next? It's easy for us to just drift or I need to go down and buy that. Come down and get the next best milkshake at Big Al's Drive-In, and you'll never miss it. We've been serving people for 50 years and it's a hot day. You need to be here now. Come on down today. Those engagements are critical. And it's amazing how often people are shy or they don't want to be looking pushy or they don't want to seem salesy, except for people who are really bred in sales, in the sales, and they can overwhelm. Leveraging your brand means that you pay attention to who your ideal client is, what your core values are and your messaging is and who they are, what they want, and then think through how you feel, how do you want them to feel, and what do you say to guide that? How do you want them to think about your brand? And what do you want them to do about your brand? And really the feeling isn't just generic feeling. How do you want them to feel towards you?
Mhm.
I think the best example I was thinking about when I was preparing for all this was the idea of people that are really close friends to you. How do I want them to feel? If for somebody who's like, this is still a little abstract for me, putting it in the context of if you've got a really good friend, do you like being, somebody you like being around, I assume, somebody you trust, somebody you actually respect, you would actually go to for advice. We're thinking about not just a good friend, but we're talking about those few people that you're like, I love being around them. I really respect them. And I would ask them for help and I would ask them for counsel. How do you feel about them? Because that's somebody who you have a high bond with and you have a whole lot of trust with. And that's what you want from your customers.
Mm.
You want to figure out, how do I behave in a way what do I say? What do I do? When do I do it? So that people actually feel that way about us in a way that's not manipulative. How would you describe? Because oftentimes we have somebody say, well, wait a minute, that all sounds, because you're very calculated about it, because you actually have a formula, that sounds really manipulative. And it doesn't sound like it could be actually authentic or genuine because you're being so strategic about it. Does that mean just because we thought through it that it's manipulative?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that if I'm trying to cultivate a friendship, I'm making conscious decisions. And part of those conscious decisions is how do I build trust? How do I connect in ways that are meaningful and not overwhelming? I mean, I've been married too long to think about dating, but if you are dating, you
I'm
know,
glad to hear that.
yeah. But if you're dating someone, if you're being wise about it and you're building trust along the way, you're taking smaller steps so that you build that trust and you don't skip a bunch of steps and make them feel uncomfortable. So, you're not going to go to somebody in a coffee shop and be like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Let's name our children," because that would be weird, right? So, how do you take calculated steps towards growing a friendship, a relationship, whatever it is? And I think we have to think about our customers that way. And the times where we make mistakes is where we make assumptions that we're further along in the trust process than we are. So it happens even when you're experienced and you're trying. And I think it's just really, really important that we understand that, again, humans are buying from humans. You're selling to humans. So how do we structure the crafting and the messaging and the bonding in ways that lead to that sale? And if it's manipulative in a healthy way. We all do that. We need to. It's important. So that's how I would respond.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because there is a sense in which if you're really going to leverage your brand that's sustainable, you need to figure out what those core attributes of your company and your vision are, your core values and everything else, and look for clients that align with that. And then just you need to be, like you said, in a friendship, building a friendship or dating or anything else. You want to be intentional
Yeah, you're
and
cultivating.
efficient, and you don't want to waste a lot of time. And then in the midst of it, you bring authenticity to the table. If you can do all of these things and be authentic to who you are, keeping the messaging, the wording, the values, this is who we are, and we're just making sure we're communicating that. And this is what we have to offer if it's something that's helpful for you.
Yeah,
Those literally can leverage your brand in a way to create multiple growth and the ability to create new customers and to retain customers so that they're actually spending more money with you, whether you're dealing with day-to-day commodities or you're dealing with premier products
yeah. Or services.
or services.
Yeah.
And those are the ways that we think about as we're branding our company and growing our company. And I think this is strategic in how consistency, because it's so easy to get off on trends or tricks or something you heard somebody else say, and you water that down and you actually diminish your brand and you don't even realize you're doing it. And that's the point of today.